Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another stream. It's your host, Dhaiphong. And as you can see, I am joined by some titans of journalism today and activism, especially around Palestine. That will be our focus today. So first joining me is Lowkey, journalist, rapper, activist. You've probably seen his great work around on Palestine. Welcome back to the program, Lowkey. It's good to be with you.
Thank you very much for having me, Danny. I appreciate it.
Of course, of course. Before we get started, everyone, make sure you're liking this stream. People need to hear this, so that helps boost the algorithm. You can support this program, of course. All the links are in the description, but be sure to like, if anything, so we can get this boosted out. Welcome everyone on Rockfin. Welcome everyone on Rumble. You can also find me there at my name, Danny Dhaiphong. So let's get started. Low key. The brutal news today, the devastating news, is that all the patients in Al-Shifa Hospital have been killed, or they've died, but they essentially have been killed, all 54 of them in the ICU. Now, this has been a story for many days. Israel's occupation of this hospital, its bombardment. I'll just pull up a video of some of the most, I think, heinous activity. I'll show the video of them literally planting a flag on this hospital as if they are essentially colonizing a hospital. So here it is. So there is that. And of course, the propaganda around this has been, or the misinformation, so to speak, is that Hamas is hiding under the hospital. And there have been a lot of so-called imagery supposedly proving this from the Israeli offense occupation forces. And let me just show you one, and then I'll kick it to you, Lowkey, for your reaction to this. Let me just pull it up here. So here is the video that the IDF published, supposedly claiming that there's a tunnel underneath the hospital. It is essentially just a video of a hole, but it gets stranger. And as, of course, the misinformation, the propaganda has gotten incredibly strange, as you can see here. Guns, supposedly. We can see those. This is what they've been claiming. I mean, the propaganda has been intense. Your reaction to all of this, Lowkey?
Well, my understanding is that it is all of the ICU patients in Al-Shifa Hospital that have died. There's a myriad of ways in which that may have happened. This is an area that has been deprived of fuel for over a month now. You are talking about people that would have needed dialysis for kidney problems. You are talking about babies on incubators. You are talking about really the most desperate people in this situation. Many of them will have died of dehydration. There has been no water allowed into Gaza across these days. And in fact, we know of the Israeli military taking bottles of water from the basement of Al-Shifa Hospital and repackaging it as Israeli aid and giving it to people in there. We know of examples where people have tried to exit the hospital waving white flags and been shot at. And things like this are happening across the north of Gaza. Israel defines itself really by this activity. It picks on the weakest and most vulnerable in any community. And in this case, the community is the Palestinians. We are seeing them being targeted in this way. They're not able to engage in urban warfare in an effective manner. Israel has proven that when it attempts to engage with Palestinian fighters street to street, hand to hand, it loses tanks, but it's believed almost 100 Israeli military vehicles, as far as I understand from the last check, have been destroyed in their attempt to subjugate Gaza. And so what that means is that Israel then relies on the drones, on the F-16s, on the F-35s to bomb from above and attack civilian infrastructure, attack places of worship, attack hospitals, as is the case of Al-Shifa. And Israel, of course, this hospital goes back to the British Mandate of Palestine. It originally became a health facility in 1946, and it's passed through different administrations over that time. Of course, we know that Gaza was officially under Egyptian authority until 1967, and Israeli occupation forces in 1983 are believed to have built a bunker underneath the hospital. So for some time, the claim was that ultimately, if the Israelis do find a bunker, they would know because they built it in the first place. But what we've seen, interestingly, in the last day or so, Israel put out a video of its soldiers supposedly finding weapons, an AK-47 to be precise, in the MRI room of Al-Shifa Hospital. Now, the BBC came up and said when the video was released, Israel found two weapons in the MRI room. And then when the BBC turned up to be led around the hospital, actually Israel was able to produce four weapons that had been found in the MRI room. And the BBC took some issue with this, saying they weren't sure if this was necessarily reliable, because it seemed that in Israel's supposedly unedited video, which it turned out Israel had edited, there had only been two weapons. But then you have the testimony of a British doctor on Twitter who has just come out and is, his intervention is important in this equation. His name is Adil Hamad, and he has said, this was a British doctor who, up until a few weeks ago, as far as I understand, was working in Al-Shifa Hospital. And he has said that the MRI machine contains a magnet, which would mean that the storing of any metal objects in an MRI room, especially guns, would be completely unrealistic, because essentially the magnet would bring the guns towards it, and any metal items would be sucked towards those weapons. So this is another in a long line, a litany of Israel's lies to justify a genocidal war, in the name of battling a non-state actor. Israel's war on a concentration camp consists largely of bombing civilian targets. And what has also come out is the extent to which the United States is helping Israel. Not only do you have the Delta Force on the ground, key US Special Operations Unit, what you also have is the United States offering transporting weapons daily across this last month from a British military base in Cyprus. Now, this is a serious level of complicity that we are talking about with what has happened. And that's the reason that you have people like Hassan Nasrallah of Hezbollah talking clearly about this as a US war. This is a US war against the region. And Biden has backed Israel in ways that no previous US presidents have. So I think all of those who have gone out of their way to try and beautify the image of the Democrats across these years really have to eat humble pie, because what Joe Biden has shown you is he is equally as racist as Donald Trump in terms of what is the substance of his actions. And of course, I looked at the funding of Israel lobbyists to US members of Congress across the last 30 or 40 years. And actually, the Democrats have received almost twice as much from Israel lobbyists as the Republicans have. So we're talking about major levels of complicity of both Britain and the United States. Really, a trilateral security state has been established between Britain, the United States, and Israel. And this war is one manifestation of that.
Yeah, no, the Democratic Party funding is very targeted too, because Israel is quite aware, the Israel lobby is quite aware just who votes Democrat, just which demographics kind of need to be pushed in Israel's direction. The Republicans are taken. They are all in, but it's Democratic Party voters that have a little bit of trouble. So Democratic Party politicians are very valuable to the Israel lobby. So, given this, I wanted your take on, there have been reports, and we've seen Netanyahu, we've seen the Western media kind of, especially when talking to Netanyahu, express some dismay about the civilian casualties. I think that the protests, a lot of the journalism that's been done independently is starting to have an effect. However, as you said, I mean, the Biden administration is not only doing everything that you said it's doing, but it's many ways it's doing it secretly. It's not as open as it has been around, say, Ukraine. So what do you make of this contradiction between the United States under Biden all in on Israel's brutal genocide in Gaza, while also there's this kind of more public walking a line of Israel needs total support, but at the same time, it's not looking too good, that there are videos everywhere showing just the absolute horror that's taking place at the hands of Israel.
Well, it's interesting that you mention Ukraine, because there seems to have been certainly a pivot of resources, but not only resources. Actually, it was revealed recently that Israel has European mercenaries fighting with it in Gaza. So Spanish mercenary Pedro Diaz Flores was pictured there with the Israeli occupation forces. Now, who is he? He was an individual that fought in Ukraine, where he got involved through the neo-Nazi Azov battalion. Now, he claimed that his involvement in Ukraine came from messaging the Azov Telegram channel, and then being picked up by Azov and taken to Ukraine, where he was integrated into what they call the Charlie 1 unit of the Ukrainian military intelligence. And he later went on to a unit called Bravo 2. And, when he talks about his time in the Ukrainian military intelligence, he says, there were excellent professionals, mostly Americans, also many Hispanics. I met a Mexican who was also accused of selling human skulls and bones. Now, he has turned up with the Israeli military in Gaza. How many other warlord-like figures who were active in Ukraine have now turned up in Gaza with the Israeli military? What we are seeing is colonialism in 2023. We are seeing the forces of European powers come together to work to subjugate the global south. And Gaza is considered the most south of the global south as of today. Gaza is holding up the sky for the rest of humanity. You have literally the best people in the world, the best of humanity, are now clinging to life in every way they can in Gaza. They are helping children to breathe, literally breath by breath. They are trying to make bread to sustain people's lives. We can't forget that Israel has savagely attacked almost all bakeries in Gaza. And the thing with Israel's campaign to take the north of Gaza so far, you have to remember that around 20 nautical miles off the coast of Gaza, you have huge reserves of gas. And Israel actually signed deals with British Gas Group to develop that area, and was not able to because Gaza was controlled by Hamas. So it was not able to exploit that source of gas. Now, if you are Western powers who are furious with the extent to which sanctions on Russia have not been effective due to these very clear resource wars, then it would make sense for you to support Israel's land grab and also resource grab in Gaza. You also have the possibility of Israel developing a port from the north of Gaza, Ben Gurion Canal, as has been spoken about in the past by several key Zionist thinkers. And this would absolutely change the global economy in massive ways and would definitely benefit the United States, Gulf allies. It would, of course, harm Egypt and the Suez Canal. It would harm the interests of Iran and others. So there's a myriad of reasons why the United States sees its interests reflected in what Israel is doing in Gaza. And also, interestingly, Israeli political figures have said very clearly that they saw what happened in Yemen in the British-US proxy war, Israeli proxy war against Iran in Yemen, backing of the Saudis, who attacked all manner of civilian infrastructure, who bombed farms over 1,000 times. And also in terms of human suffering, in terms of starvation, in terms of children dying from dehydration. Ultimately, Israel saw this and saw that our understanding of what the international community is had absolutely no intention to stop or ameliorate any of these issues. And that was perceived to be a green light for the Israelis to engage in this war on Gaza. They saw in terms of human displacement what came out of the US war against Daesh, ISIS. They've often mentioned the carpet bombing of Raqqa and of Mosul. They've seen in terms of human displacement that came out of Syria and the way in which the quote-unquote international community was able to absorb and provide tents for tens of thousands of people. And so they have seen the possibility of moving the Palestinians from Gaza into the Sinai Desert. There's been suggestions by Israeli political figures of each country in the world taking maybe a few hundred Palestinians, the different Arab states taking thousands of Palestinians. They've tried to think of ways that they can distribute Palestinians around the world, and Palestinians are the largest refugee population in the world. 1 in 3 refugees in the world is a Palestinian. So Israel is seeking, true to the nature of Zionism as an ideology, it is seeking a maximalist, fantastical aim in terms of what it wants to achieve. All of this is wrapped up in the campaign to demolish and replace Al-Aqsa. And, Yusuf al-Kabir, an Iraqi Jewish lawyer in the 1930s, he referred to the Zionist movement as a form of militant archaeology. And that is nowhere more clear than the Temple Mount movement's aims at Al-Aqsa. The Temple Mount movement is funded by both the Israeli Ministry of Education and the Israeli Ministry of Culture, and the Deputy Defense Minister of Israel, when he was in his position, was funding this organization, and US billionaires like Henry Swiker or Simon Falek, who runs Duty Free America. They are funding this movement, which has the stated objective of demolishing the first Qibla in Islam, the direction to which Muslims prayed before it became centered in Mecca. You're talking about a very important place to Muslims around the world, that Israel has the intention, the stated purpose of demolishing this compound and replacing it with a temple, which those in the Temple Mount movement believe existed 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. Militant archaeology is certainly the word for it. But these are Israel's aims. Key Israeli political figures have written about it historically. The idea of Jordan absorbing the Palestinians in the West Bank, Egypt absorbing the Palestinians in Gaza, and the destruction of Al-Aqsa. So these are the stakes of where we are with this genocidal war. And now the Israelis have said, actually, Hamas are not in North Gaza, they're in the south of Gaza. So we're now going to go into this small area of land that they've forced millions of Palestinians into. And we've identified 4 locations in places like Khan Yunis in the south of Gaza. And now Palestinians have to go even further into the space of Rafah, between the crossing to get into Egypt. So they are pushing the Palestinians, making Gaza as uninhabitable as possible in order to push them in that direction. And so Joe Biden will go down in history as Genocide Joe. He will not he will not live it down, the blood from this horrendous chapter in human history.
Yeah, and to think Gaza was already virtually unlivable before this occurred, and now, I mean, from the beginning it was a trial, pushing people down, killing as many people as possible, and pushing people south, and then bombing that area. It seems like that was the trap all along. And what you speak of, I think, is so important, the context of, you know, this project of greater Israel, not just Israel as I think a lot of people think Israel is simply satisfied with you know, Palestine and expanding on that territory. It is about expanding much farther than that, and Palestinians, of course, pay the highest price. But that's why this is often talked about regionally. And so, you know, maybe before we move on, could you talk about how you've been viewing how the overall region has reacted to this? I know there was the Riyadh summit between the Arab states and the Muslim majority countries. And kind of what you intimate is that given that there are these complex interests that are fueled mainly by the United States, it seems to have caused huge divisions regionally. And I'm curious about your take on it.
Well, Jordan, from its foundation, its purpose was to absorb the movements of people from other places. The vast majority of the population in Jordan are Palestinian. So Jordan is playing a terrible role. It has intercepted rockets that were aimed to strike Israel. It has arrested around 800 people who protested outside the Israeli embassy just in the last few weeks. And it will absolutely, you know, like King Abdullah after 1948, the original King Abdullah, who was eventually assassinated on the grounds of Al-Aqsa because of his work with the Israelis in the Nakba 1948 war, and his work with the British. And then you have the legacy of King Hussein, who in 1967 also betrayed the Palestinian and Arab and Egyptian cause by helping the Israelis secretly. The King of Morocco did the same in that war. And unfortunately, what we have now are those who still rule those countries, whether it's Morocco, Bahrain, you have, of course, Jordan, you have, of course, Saudi Arabia. Now, you know, the talk of will Saudi normalize with Israel? Saudi has normalized with Israel. Saudi Arabia has already normalized with Israel. When they used Pegasus spyware to hack the phone of Jamal Khashoggi, that showed you something, that in effect, Saudi Arabia was outsourcing its external intelligence functions to Israeli intelligence. NSO Group is an arm of Israeli intelligence, of Unit 8200. That's the basis that all of these organizations were founded by. You know, Netanyahu's most world-changing policy was in 2012, as reported by Calculus Tech, to move personnel from Unit 8200, Israel's electronic communications surveillance unit, which spies on Palestinian electronic communications and then blackmails them on the basis of what they've got from them through that mechanism, to move personnel from there into private tech companies and to found tech companies. So, for example, with Facebook, they literally procured in 2013 an Israeli tech company called Anava, and it enabled them, and it was founded again by personnel from Unit 8200, it enabled them to spy on our phone use if we had Facebook, and it then informed their decision to buy WhatsApp. And so later Facebook had to really close down that spyware that it had purchased from Israel. But what that policy has done has integrated Israeli intelligence with so many different intelligence services in the region. So, for instance, you have a company called Celebrite. Get this. Celebrite, again, founded by alumni of Unit 8200 in Israeli military intelligence. Celebrite not only hacks phones for the British police, it hacks phones for the Venezuelan police, it hacks phones for the Pakistani police, and it even hacks phones, or did until the Ukraine war, for the Russian government. Celebrite has achieved a greater penetration of independent states than any other of these Israeli companies. But a company like NSO Group was delivering this service to Saudi Arabia and was hacking Jamal Khashoggi's phone. Saudi Arabia has already normalized with Israel. People are getting detained and interrogated for wearing a kufiya in Saudi Arabia. People are getting taken out of stadiums and matches for waving the Palestinian flag in Saudi Arabia. So let's be absolutely clear about what is happening there. In terms of the resistance axis in the region, what you have now is the United States imperiling itself to a further degree in countries like Iraq and Syria, and it is hastening its withdrawal from the region. And I'll tell you why particularly. China signed with Iran a plan to invest $500 billion in the Iranian economy over the next 10 to 20 years. Now, what happened after that? After that, China comes and speaks to Saudi Arabia and says, look, if you want deals with us as the world's #1 economy, as they are in many ways, but as they will be undisputed very, very soon, Saudi Arabia was told that they had to make peace with Iran and stop the war in Yemen. And what happened? They made peace with Iran and stopped the war in Yemen. After that, Saudi Arabia, because you have to understand that the mechanisms through which both the Lebanese and the Palestinians have been able to defend themselves in the region has been reliant on Iranian training and Iranian army. That's a documented fact. Whether people like it or not, it's a fact. So when Iran was brought out of isolation, which the deal with China did serve to do to some extent, also, it meant that the resistance factions were brought out of isolation. So it meant that Saudi Arabia accepted a delegation from the Palestinian Al-Haraka al-Muqawama al-Islamiyya, Hamas. Yeah, it meant that Saudi Arabia made overtures to Hezbollah in Lebanon. Now, if you were to solve Saudi issues with Hezbollah in Lebanon, you would solve a huge amount of the problems which afflict that society, because there has been a cold and hot war in Lebanon across the last few decades between with the Saudis on one side, the US and Israel on the, with them against Iran, Hezbollah, and those that support Palestinian rights, you know, those that see the Palestinians in the camps of Lebanon as human beings. And ultimately, that has been the sharp crack in the region. Now, what this will do is make a state like Saudi Arabia have to try to somehow depict itself as less pro-Israel than it is. As we know, the Gulf did not choose the US side of the proxy war in Ukraine. They did not choose NATO's side. Yes, they maybe sent symbolic weapons shipments to Ukraine, but ultimately they chose the Russian side. What you're seeing now, though, is that Israel, as a vestige of European and Anglo-Saxon domination of the global South, when more and more clarity becomes clear, let's remember this also, that the United States, which their government represents around 360 million people, right? It designates Palestinian armed resistance as terrorism. Okay, the British government, which represents something like 67 million people, it designates Palestinian armed resistance as terrorism. The EU designates it in the same way. Japan designates it in the same way. Israel designates it in the same way. Okay, altogether, that's less than 1 billion human beings. The governments that do not designate Palestinian resistance as terrorism, who are they? The government of Switzerland represents about 10 million people. Government of Turkey represents about 80 million people. The government of Russia, which represents many, many millions of people. And the government of China, which represents 1.4 billion people, 18 to 20% of humanity. The vast majority of humanity is represented by governments who do not designate Palestinian armed resistance as terrorism. UN Resolution 3246 clearly states any group of people exposed to a foreign military occupation have the right to armed resistance. The vast majority of humanity see themselves in the Palestinians as post-colonial subjects. Israel is imposing an unsustainable ideology on the head of Palestinian people, and more cruelty, fascistic cruelty on an industrial scale will be required to sustain Zionism. And that is running out ultimately.
Yeah, no, I mean that was I think that was a really sweeping analysis of the regional situation that everyone needs to take into account. Now, maybe we can close the last half of our hour on your friend Piers Morgan, because I know you've had exchanges with Piers Morgan. There have been many. I think he has been, as I said to you before we came on, doing a kind of charm offensive for Israel, giving Israel kind of a soft landing for its brutal crimes by playing a kind of a both sides orientation. And now I'm going to play a few videos, very short, very brief. The first of which is one that you posted today on your Twitter account, formerly known as Twitter, now X, where he gets into exchange with another journalist who's asking him, does he see the IDF as a terrorist group? And here was his answer.
I want to commend you, Piers, honestly, because bringing me on for the second time, I have to commend you. And the fact that you actually condemned the settlements is very good. But people want to know, do you think the IDF is a terrorist organization?
No.
You don't think they're a terrorist organization? Okay, well, if you look at the UN definition of terrorist organization, they say killing civilians for political
gains. So you're asking my opinion?
No, but if the UN definition, according to the UN definition, is killing civilians for political objectives. Why are they not terrorist organizations?
Well, you've asked me a straight question. I don't think they are terror organizations.
So when you see babies like this, the ones who kill babies like this are not terrorists.
It's horrific.
So the people who kill babies like this are not terrorists.
Well, let me respond.
Yes.
Let me respond. Sure. I believe Israel has a right to defend itself.
Okay.
I agree that they need to get rid of Hamas.
In this way?
Or a terror group.
In this way?
Well, here's the quandary for me morally, right?
Why is that a quandary, though?
I'll tell you why.
With Hamas, it's not a quandary.
I'll tell you why. Because in war, when you declare war, as Britain did with the Nazis,
100-to-1 ratio.
No,
100
of course,
to 1.
There are
combatant to non-combatant ratio.
A far higher number of children in Gaza, proportion to population, than almost anywhere in the world.
Piers,
so when they go after Hamas,
give me a chance.
Very sadly, Mohammed, let me finish.
This is becoming no.
Very sadly,
you are the one who insisted on equal time. I never did, but you will not respect equal time.
I will come to you literally in 30 seconds.
He's going to ask you a question.
In 30 seconds, I'll come to you.
He's going to come to you afterwards.
Let me finish, please. I am in charge here.
So with Piers was also Rabbi Shmuley, as you could see, who people may know him for outing RFK Jr.'s campaign as a Zionist project. But with that said, Lowkey, first your reaction to that clip, and then we'll play yours because I think you had a good rebuttal on Piers about this exact problem that was outlined here. But I want to kick it to you.
Well, as I will get into why this is and the nuts and bolts of why this is, ultimately Piers Morgan does not view all human life as equal. He uses very emotive language to describe the October 7th operation, of which much is not clear, of which Israel has spread much disinformation about, of which we have seen Israel implement the Hannibal Directive, according to an Israeli Air Force officer, in which the Hannibal Directive, developed by Israel in its occupation of Lebanon in the 80s, entails Israel sometimes killing its own captives that are taken by the Palestinian or Lebanese side in order to avoid them being taken as hostages. For instance, recently Mark Regev admitted that the charred remains that were shown in cars were not actually Israelis killed by Palestinian fighters. They were Palestinians killed by the Israelis, and probably Israelis too, though Israel again is lying about that. But Piers Morgan takes his talking points directly from the Israeli military and uses them to inform his coverage. And what Mohammed Hijab is doing with this section is he is pointing out that hypocrisy in quite a clear way.
And the subtle, I don't know if you caught, I'm sure you caught this, Lowkey, the subtle hint of Hamas equals Nazis, this historical relationship that's constant, connection that's constantly drawn, sometimes in more crass ways by the most enthusiastic Zionists who constantly compare Hamas to the Nazis of the World War II era, or people like Piers Morgan who make this historical reference constantly to World War II, as the West tends to like to do when there's a war that they need to justify. They compare it to World War II because that's supposed to be the war for democracy. So we live in a time where talking about Hamas is essentially really difficult because the weight of the information and misinformation is totally stacked on the side of Hamas equals Nazis. I mean, what's been your reaction to this? Because it feels like it's been maybe the principal talking point on how to denigrate all people of Gaza, all Palestinians in Gaza, to dehumanize them because Hamas, essentially.
Yeah, essentially, it's a ruse, it's a subterfuge, it's a trope, it's a purposeful misrepresentation of Palestinian resistance to settler colonialism, which has gone on for around 100 years, over 100 years. You have to understand that numerous groups have popped up throughout this time, and the particular bogeyman that they are focusing on today is just one of those many groups that have found a way to resist Israeli settler colonialism and expulsion of Palestinians from their land. What I would like to say in terms of Piers Morgan is he benefits from a very well manufactured creative ambiguity, which is that of the eternal blank slate. So he constantly couches whatever he says in the terms of him not having a horse in this race, of him being neutral, of him not picking either side. I'm equally, classic liberal moralism. I'm equally outraged by this as I am by this, which he just factually is not. But I've obviously investigated a lot of this stuff, and I have more to add about how and why he views the situation in the way he does and what impedes him from seeing it in an objective manner. But also there is the genuine worry that he is coordinating his coverage of this with particular forces. You also have to think about the fact that he has only once, despite covering Gaza for an entire month, only once brought on somebody from Gaza who has lost family members. The majority of people he asked to come on the show are non-Palestinian, Arabs, or Middle Easterners. Now that causes you to wonder if he is purposely talking to people like me, who, while they have a personal investment, which is many years of working on this issue, they do not have the same personal investment as somebody who's lost tens of members of their family. Were he to, every time he brought on somebody such as myself or Mohammed Hijab, brought on somebody who'd lost tens of members of their family, the effect on the viewer would be markedly different.
Yeah. Would he be able to talk like this in front of them and get away with it? That is a huge question. Because, in your appearance, and I'll just place, your appearance on his program did go viral, so to speak, because, it's easy for him, I think, to touch a nerve, since he is essentially doing this both sides ism. But I want to just play a short clip that's been going around from you and get your reaction to your appearance and how you view. I know that you said you have more to say about his function, so we can get more into that. So here we go.
To Nelson Mandela, who served 20
For context, it was cut off a little bit. You were talking about how he was very comfortable comparing himself to Nelson Mandela, but let's continue.
7 years in jail for what they described as terrorism at the time, but yet you cannot see what the vast majority of human rights organizations in the world see when they look at the Palestinians. When you look at UN Resolution 194, paragraph 11, the Palestinians have the right to return home. Almost a million of them were displaced in 1948 with the foundation of the State of Israel. And what we are now on the brink of is Palestinians, millions of them, being driven into the Sinai Desert with help of the US Delta Force,
Yeah, but Lowkey,
with help
let me
of the
jump
British.
in. Let me
This
jump
is
in.
a manufactured, an Israeli-manufactured humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza. There is a 23% infant mortality
Lowkey,
rate in Gaza.
Let me say something. I completely agree with you about the plight of the Palestinian people. I've tweeted about this for the last 2 weeks.
No, to be fair, you haven't, Piers, and this is not journalism. Shireen Abu
Well, then you haven't read my
was
tweets.
journalism. Yasser Murtaja was journalism. Mu'taz Azaiza, that's journalism. Palestinians are reaching out from the cage that Israel has put them in, and they are trying to speak to the world.
Yeah,
and they are
I'm
being
simply
met.
saying-
They are being
that's
met with
fine.
cold indifference. And I would say to you, Piers, I would say to
Yeah.
you that gentleman that you've just had on the show, Mark Regev, he belongs in The Hague. David Petraeus, you know, Piers, you made your reputation as opposing the invasion of Iraq. Well, I would ask you, journalist to journalist, how could you justify the interview you just gave to the head of US forces in that illegal occupation of Iraq that David Petraeus led? He was then the head of the CIA. Both of the individuals that you have just had on this show deserve to be in The Hague, tried for war crimes. I am not anything like them. I have not hurt a fly. Those two men have. Why are they given the respectability that you gave them with your interview? And why am I interrogated as if I am somehow someone that could hurt a human being?
So that was, I mean, that's been going around, and I think it's very astute. It kind of exposes Piers, but could you talk more about more of what you had to say about his particular function? Because I think Piers Morgan kind of has a certain role that much of the Western mainstream media, especially in the United States, play as well.
Well, firstly, let's start with the platform that he works on, which is Talk TV. Now, Talk TV was founded by Rupert Murdoch, himself a close friend of Ariel Sharon, also somebody who had funded through the News Corp Foundation an organization called the Jerusalem Foundation, which builds inside illegal Israeli settlements in Jerusalem, Sheikh Jarrah, the neighborhood of the Kurd family, for example. In addition to that, Rupert Murdoch was on the board of an oil and gas company called Genie Energy, at the same time that it had oil and gas deals in the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights of Syria. So Rupert Murdoch is on top of that also somebody who had the company LLM Communications lobbying for him. And LLM Communications was a project of Jonathan Mendelsohn, who was the head of the Labour Friends of Israel at the same time. So ultimately, Rupert Murdoch shared a key lobbyist with Israel in Britain. Now, when we look at Piers Morgan himself, there is a personal relationship with the Mendelsohn family, which has not been seriously interrogated and investigated. And I believe it leaves some clues about how he may be organizing this sophisticated engagement strategy with pro-Palestinian figures. So Piers Morgan has appeared several times raising funds for the Norwood Charity. Now, the Norwood Charity is a project of the Mendelsohn, Jonathan Mendelsohn and Nicola Mendelsohn. Now, Jonathan Mendelsohn not only was the head of the Israeli embassy proxy, the Labour Friends of Israel. Jonathan Mendelsohn has also funded several pro-Israel organizations, but also he was someone that is a childhood friend of Mark Regev, the individual I just mentioned and spokesman for the Israeli military. They were together in a summer camp and know each other very well. In addition to that, Nicola Mendelsohn, another close friend of Piers Morgan, is somebody that has spoken on Israeli government-supported conferences, but more importantly, has a very key role at Facebook, where she led the procurement of the Israeli tech company that I mentioned that was founded by personnel of Israeli intelligence. In addition to that, you have to remember that Nicola Mendelsohn, under her watch, Meta, the company Meta and Facebook, has become full of personnel from Unit 8200. And also the charity Norwood that Piers Morgan has fronted campaigns for several times also has as one of its head figures Trevor Chin. Now, Trevor Chin is a key Israel lobbyist in this country. He is the president of one of Israel's 4 national institutions, the UJIA. He's also on the executive committee of Israel's largest lobby group in the UK, BICOM. And Chin is also known to have bankrolled the Labour Friends of Israel and funded Keir Starmer and funded Wes Streeting and funded David Lammy. So ultimately, this is the milieu that Piers Morgan is part of. But more important than all of this, he was pictured on the 22nd of October, right in the midst of his coverage of the war on Gaza, at a restaurant in New York, sitting next to Nicola Mendelsohn, this Israel lobbyist within Facebook, Nicola Mendelsohn, and also sitting next to the singer Catherine Jenkins. Now, Catherine Jenkins has raised funds for the JNF, which is Israel's largest settlement building body in occupied Palestine. So are we to believe that these sharply pro-Israel individuals, who are clearly close friends of Piers Morgan, did not in any way seek to influence his coverage of events in Gaza? I think it would be deeply naive of us to believe that somebody can have close friends who actively lobby for the interests of Israel and not engage with this issue in a biased way. And ultimately, we are seeing it play out with Piers Morgan clearly not showing the same level of empathy for what is, in terms of proportions, far more Palestinian human suffering than Israeli human suffering. It's clear that he ultimately does not view all lives to be equal.
Right. I mean, just watching that segment where he is being shown a picture of Palestinian babies being murdered, and he immediately talks about a quandary where Israel is at war with a population that's majority children. I mean, that kind of justification and doublespeak just, I mean, it just exposes the fact that, well, was he saying this about the so-called prisoners of wars, hostages that have been missing? Has he been making those kind of justifications, finding any way to explain away what's going on with them, which, as we have seen, has been exposed over and over again as simply propaganda? All the torture and the murder over and over. We're told that this is happening to the Israeli prisoners of war, and then we find out something completely different.
Yeah, I mean, also what we have to remember is that Piers Morgan made his name as the editor of the Daily Mirror, right? Well, he became the Daily Mirror not long after it had been sold off by Robert Maxwell. But who exactly was Robert Maxwell? Well, Robert Maxwell was the owner of the Daily Mirror newspapers, but he was also an agent of Israeli intelligence. So I must be clear, Piers Morgan was not the editor of the Daily Mirror at the same time that this Israeli spy owned it, but it does imply to some extent that Israel may have had some type of presence in the Daily Mirror after Robert Maxwell selling the paper. Are we then to assume that Piers Morgan would not at any point have rubbed shoulders with any insinuations of Israeli intelligence? We've seen him pictured at a table on the 22nd of October, just 2 days before he interviewed me, if I remember correctly, with somebody who explicitly states that they have a lifelong relationship with Israel, who's married to somebody who lobbied for Israel in a proxy organization of the Israeli embassy. You know, and ultimately that's the tip of the iceberg. There is a lot more in all of this story and this attempt to control the narrative that Israel has done. You know, we're seeing Sacha Baron Cohen, for example, going at TikTok now, privately lobbying TikTok for Israel. Now, let's remember that Sacha Baron Cohen in 2019 released a film called The Spy. He was the producer of it and starred in it. Who was the director of this film, The Spy, based on Israeli spy Eli Cohen? The director of it was formerly in the a paratrooper in the Israeli military. And what was written in the Washington Post? According to the Washington Post, this film, The Spy, on Netflix, was a part of Israel's external intelligence agency, Mossad, having a recruitment drive. So now this is somebody directly intervening on Israel's behalf within the cultural sphere. We're not outnumbered, we're just out-organized. That's the bottom line here, with, to quote Malcolm X, with the story of the Palestinian struggle of staying power. And things are going to get more and more intense. We need to have a literacy about what the activities of Israel are outside of Palestine. Unfortunately, I think we have had generations of liberal misleadership which has focused us on events within Palestine and given birth to a kind of paternalism, which is about saving the Palestinians. The Palestinians are fighting themselves. The Lebanese are fighting themselves. We need to fight ourselves. We cannot use their suffering as a reason for us to just stay here and allow ourselves to be pulled around by what the Israel lobby says. You know, unfortunately, it was one of the mainstays of the Corbyn movement was to turn the other cheek and continually get slapped, was to never point out that you were being engaged by Israel lobby groups. Even when one of the key groups which militated against Corbyn relentlessly was the Board of Deputies. What did the Board of Deputies put in their trustees report just a year after killing Corbynism? They put the phrase, "We have a close working relationship with the Israeli embassy and strengthened links with the Israeli, the IDF spokesman's unit and with the Ministry of Strategic Affairs." Now, why was that not seized upon? It was me that covered it and put it on Twitter. And after that, it's been covered by other people. But nobody in even the generally accepted left media in Britain covered it. They acted as if it didn't exist. So we've actually had Israel lobby groups directly dictating what happened within the pro-Corbyn era of the Labour Party. It's a mark of shame. It's a mark of shame. And that's not going to be what this generation is going to defer to in terms of leadership on Israel. We're not acting as if Britain is not a main center of activity for the Israelis. You know, agents of Israeli intelligence killed Najil Ali in this city, in London, Palestinian cartoonist. What happened next? Margaret Thatcher expelled the Mossad base in this country because of that killing of Najil Ali. You don't have anything like that reflected inside the British political elite and class. You would do quite the opposite. You are talking about people that have very close relationships with Israel lobby groups and have facilitated the integration of British intelligence with Israeli intelligence. And that it's a mark of shame on us all.
Yeah, well, everything you said is so true, especially the point I think about this often of this paternalism that the liberal class builds around Palestine and Palestinians in particular, and it does have a huge influence in the Palestine solidarity movement as a whole. It does lead to a point where we are being kind of jockeyed around and not able to look at these larger implications, Israel's interference in UK, US, Western political affairs, Israel's role in the region beyond Palestine, that speaks to the fact that Palestinians, in fact, are not alone, but they are simply targets of a larger and broader set of interests that inevitably lead to a larger struggle that we often are not engaging in the West more broadly. We're not engaged in that larger struggle. We are reacting to massive suffering, as people should. But I think the points that you speak of are important because they do speak to us needing to look inward at where we are located, at what our governments, our particular system is enacting, because it ultimately enables Israel to do everything that is happening right now and that it is conducting at this moment, this brutal genocide. But Lowkey, before I let you go, tell me where, or tell me, but also tell our audience where people can find you and your work at this moment.
So they can find me on Twitter, Lowkey Online, and on Instagram with, I think, a similar name, Lowkey Online. Please do keep in touch with what we are doing. You know, we are part of a movement that is responding to the inability of our established media channels to actually interrogate the powerful. And so, you know, my humble contribution is an increased criticality about the way that power operates and the mechanisms of domination are exacted upon our societies.
Thank you, Lowkey, for once again joining the program. We will definitely be in touch. Take good care, and see you next time.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye. So stay tuned, everyone. Stay tuned. Aaron Maté of the Gray Zone will be joining at any moment now. But while we wait, of course, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if you're new to the channel, hit the notifications bell so you get notified. Also, be sure to check out the links in the video description as to where you can support this program, principally Patreon, but of course there's Substack and many other options for one-time options, buy me a coffee, PayPal, etc. But do stick around as we wait for Aaron Maté to come on. No super chat questions or anything like that thus far. We have about 1,757 viewers, about 1,000 likes. So, of course, you can keep hitting that like button and getting more people onto the program. If we do have time at the end, I will be sure to cover a story on the recent China exchange. But let me see what's going on with Aaron. I hope everyone is doing well today. I don't see him yet in the backstage, but he is slated to come on. I don't usually do. I usually have the guests on at the same time, but there was a schedule thing going on, and I want to cover Aaron Maté's, in particular, his confrontation of Senator Chris Coons, which was an incredible exchange, and I think it's worth getting his reactions to it and talking more about this issue. So with that said, everyone, do stick around, do hit that like button as we wait for Aaron to arrive. There has been a lot going on, of course, outside of Palestine too. We have the unraveling of the Ukraine conflict. We also have the visit from Xi Jinping to San Francisco. And I will bring on now our guest of honor here, Aaron Maté. Hello, Aaron. I see you're preparing, so no rush.
Yeah, just 1 second. I just got to connect my microphone. Just 1 second.
Of course, of course. All right. So as you know, everyone, Aaron Maté is, if you don't know him already, he is a journalist at the Gray Zone. He's been doing incredible work around Palestine for many years. And of course, has been covering the conflict in Ukraine very closely. I would say he's the journalist on all things Russiagate as well. Welcome, Aaron. It is good to be with you today.
Good to be here, Danny, and hello to everybody watching. Thanks for tuning in.
Sure. So, Aaron, I thought we could begin on your confrontation, so to speak, of Senator Chris Coons on an Amtrak train. Very interesting context for this. But perhaps I can play the video and get your reactions. I think everyone needs to see it if anyone has not seen it yet, because I think it gets to the heart of the matter that we have been speaking about with Lowkey before this. But let's get into it, and then we can chat.
Senator, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but when I call for a ceasefire in Gaza, I'm a journalist. My name's Aaron Maté. When I call for a ceasefire in Gaza, you have 4,600 children killed. 46. I know it's a quiet card. I apologize for abuse, but I understand. But children are dying. Children are dying, sir. More than 40. When I call for a ceasefire, they're being killed with our weapons. U.S. weapons are killing kids in Gaza.
Who are you?
My name is Aaron Maté. I'm a
Nice
journalist.
to meet you, Aaron.
Likewise.
Please stop talking to me.
I'm sorry, sir. It's of dire import. More than 11,000 civilians as we're
Who are
talking
you?
being killed. I'm a journalist with
For
for the Gray Zone.
what's the gray zone?
It's a U.S. based news website.
Good for you.
Thank you. And right now with
Aaron,
our support,
please
kids are
stop.
being killed. I'm sorry. With our
Please
weapons,
stop.
I'm asking you to explain why not call for a
Aaron, you're
ceasefire.
bothering me and everyone else around.
Kids in Gaza are being massacred. I'm
Okay.
asking you,
Aaron.
please explain why not call for a
Aaron.
ceasefire.
Stop. Sir, could I please have some help here?
Kids are being killed with our
Please stop.
weapons.
I'm asking you to stop.
Why not stop
This
the?
is
Why
not
not
an
call for
appropriate
stopping
place
the
for you
bomb?
to interview me. You're bothering everybody else
It's
around us.
a crisis
How
right
did you
now.
get this seat?
I bought the seat.
No. He's bothering me while I'm trying to do work.
and our government is paying for weapons that are murdering children in Gaza. I'm asking him why not call for a ceasefire.
Aaron,
Can you explain that?
please stop.
Can I ask you to explain why not call for a
You've already asked
ceasefire?
me 5 times. I'm not
And
going to
why
call
won't you
for a
explain?
ceasefire. I strongly support humanitarian causes. I've urged the Israeli government to target their campaign against Hamas. But you need
Do you think
to
the
stop.
campaign is targeting against Hamas when
Aaron,
civilians are being massacred,
Aaron.
when babies and incubators are dying
Aaron,
because the
please
fuel's
stop,
being cut
or I'm
off?
going to have you thrown off this train. Please stop doing this.
I have to
You've
ask these
asked me
questions.
10 times.
I know, and I
You're
will keep.
getting as professional, measured, and appropriate an answer out of me as you can. This is not professional journalism. Please get up and leave now.
I don't think it's humane to be massacring kids. That's the problem here.
That's
I
great.
realize I'm not
I don't
being
think it's
professional.
humane to be massacring kids either.
Okay, then
And
why
I
are we
think when
supporting it?
Hamas massacred 1,400 Israeli civilians,
Uh-huh.
the whole world should unite in opposition to terrorism.
First of all, the number is 1,200. It wasn't
Are
entirely
we going to
civilians, but
quibble over
regardless.
how many civilians
Well,
were
it's
massacred by
important,
Hamas?
it's important to be precise. It's important,
It is important to be precise.
but yes, civilians were massacred.
I'm a senator.
Does that give us
This
the right
is a
to kill?
quiet car. You're breaking the basic rules of how we operate on Amtrak.
Okay, and the question
Please
is,
stop.
and I believe we're breaking international law
Okay.
by supporting
Thanks for
massacres
your
of
opinion.
civilians. Yes.
You've had a lot of my time. Please move on.
Why not at least
right.
call for a ceasefire?
Wow, bravo, Aaron. First of all, you literally had him running away from you by the end of that. I mean, there's so much we could react to, but first, your thoughts on this exchange and the significance of it.
Look how hard he tries not to answer the question. He, rather than just simply answer the question, why don't you support a ceasefire? I mean, that's your position. You should be able to defend it. He asked me who I am. He asked me who I work for. He even asked me how I got the seat. I got the seat, as I told him, by paying for it. And it was fate. We were sitting right across from each other. And he keeps asking me these questions because he doesn't want to address the issue, because he must know subconsciously somewhere that what he's supporting is mass murder, including the killing of, at that point, it was over 4,600 kids. Now the death toll is far higher. Even as we're speaking now, the official death toll is outdated because this genocide is unfolding before our eyes. So he has to avoid answering the question. Finally, he does. And what does he say? He says, yes, I oppose massacres, and that's why I oppose what Hamas did on October 7th. But he's not answering the question. You know, you don't have to support what Hamas did on October 7th to oppose killing far more people inside of Gaza. And how is Israel possibly defending itself by massacring all these civilians inside of Gaza? That's not self-defense. It's a massacre. And basically, if you're saying you support Israel's right to defend itself by killing all these people, then you're also endorsing the logic behind the October 7th attack, because Palestinians were defending themselves too. They've been under a crippling blockade for decades. More than 200 Palestinians have already been killed this year. And in fact, Palestinians have a much stronger argument for killing people because they're the ones that are occupied. And they've tried everything they can to end the occupation. Israel refuses to. So you can't possibly say that Israel is justified to kill all these people in the name of defending itself by pointing to the fact that its people were killed on October 7th. Because if you're going to make that argument, then Palestinians have an infinitely stronger argument to kill people, including civilians. I don't actually adopt that logic. I don't think you can justify killing civilians. And that's why we should apply standards equally. And Israel, of course, has no right to defend its occupation, which is what it's doing. It only has the obligation to end its occupation. It doesn't have the right to fire a single bullet into Gaza. It only has the obligation to end the occupation. On October 7th, I think you could say that as Hamas militants and others, because it wasn't just Hamas, were attacking civilians, sure, Israel can defend its people then. But this is not October 7th anymore. Now we're more than a month later, and the death toll and the destruction in Gaza is incomprehensible. And that's what Senator Coons is supporting.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, it's a massacre. It's you could even call it revenge, although as you've been covering so astutely, Aaron, this has been going on for quite a long time. We're seeing just a huge magnification of it. I wanted to pull up one scene from this exchange that I want you to talk about. It's when he picked up his phone. Let's just see it first.
I don't think it's humane to be massacring kids. That's the problem here.
That's right.
So he does this, and I'm curious about what were your thoughts when that was happening? Because when I see a guy like him pick up a phone in his reaction to what you were saying, I think he's trying to call someone on you. I don't know what that would be, who that would be, but did you have any
I didn't notice that.
reaction to that?
I didn't notice that, actually. I didn't notice that. So that's actually the first time I've actually noticed that. I don't know. Maybe that's just a reflexive thing. He's trying to get out of the situation, so he's making gestures, and I mean, I don't read too much into that. I mean, what's funny is early on he claims, I'm gonna have you thrown off the train, as if he's a senator, and that's a powerful position, but he's not a train conductor. What authority does a senator have to throw me off the train for quietly asking him questions in the quiet car? Where, by the way, you're allowed to talk in the quiet car. It just says you have to speak in a soft tone, which is what, if you listen to the video, that's what I was doing. I'm speaking in a quiet tone. So and he did have me thrown off the train because even though I moved seats at the request of a conductor who said basically, if you don't move seats, we're going to have you thrown off. So I complied with that. That wasn't enough for Senator Coons, because shortly after that, he passed by me in the quiet car, saw me. I think the sight of me triggered him. And by that point, I'd already posted the clip, so it had gotten viral. So he clearly was not happy about that. And so next thing I knew, at our next stop, I was kicked off the train by 3 police officers. But there's something in there, too, about what he said, where he talked about how they massacred 1,400 civilians. It's actually 1,200, because Israel revised the figure, as I corrected him. And it's not all civilians. You have to be precise. It's about, I believe the official Israeli number is around 800 civilians, and the rest were soldiers and police. And it's just, if you're going to try to justify massacring thousands of Palestinian civilians, at minimum, you cannot be fabricating the figure of Israelis who were killed. And that's what he's doing there. And we just got some news today where Mark Regev, an Israeli spokesperson, he admitted that some of those bodies that were burned were initially thought to be Israelis. He actually admitted that they were Hamas, which then raises more questions about what actually happened on October 7th. And I don't doubt, of course, that there were atrocities committed against Israeli civilians by these militants. I don't think anybody denies that. But the question is, how many were killed by Israeli friendly fire? Because we've already seen accounts now in the Israeli media about soldiers being ordered to fire on some of these homes in these kibbutzim where there were both Israelis and also Palestinian militants. And so it's just, we can't even say with certainty exactly what happened on October 7th, except to say there were atrocities. Some of these Palestinian militants did commit atrocities, undoubtedly, but we don't know the full story of what happened. And regardless, none of that justifies committing mass murder against the people of Gaza.
Yes, indeed. And here, exactly as you said, Aaron, you were actually well within the rules of the quiet car. I think you reacted immediately afterward on video saying that you might have violated the rules, but in fact you did not, and you were kicked off anyway. But as you said, yes, there's obviously a lot of mystery shrouded on what happened on October 7th, because there's not a lot of information about it. But you've also had media reacting to what happened between you and Chris Coons, and I wanted to play. You posted a video from Fox News, that I think is worth watching, and how they're framing this. So they're claiming that you accosted him. So let's listen to the clip.
Definitely a questionable journalistic tactic there, and Coons eventually appeared to get up and move. Guys.
You know, Alex, I'm curious.
Did they throw him off the train?
Yeah.
30 minutes later, they did. When they got to Philadelphia at the next stop.
Yeah, he works for a controversial news outlet, one that has been criticized for putting up some pro-Russia propaganda and whatnot. So his tactics were never going to be orthodox. Coons' office did eventually put out a statement saying that they condemn the loss of life for any civilians, but that the focus has to be on Hamas, something that more establishment Democrats, Republicans at large have.
So
it's so funny.
There's a lot there.
It's so funny to be accused of questionable journalistic tactics by Fox News. Like, do they have any self-awareness? I mean, this is the outlet that is right now embedding with the IDF inside Gaza and letting the IDF, just like CNN is doing, vet all the footage they put on the air. So they're basically acting as stenographers for the IDF, and then they accuse me of questionable journalistic tactics. And speaking of questionable journalistic tactics, then they tried the classic defamation by innuendo by claiming I work for a pro-Russian news outlet that's been criticized for putting up pro-Russian content without specifying a single example or showing exactly what we put up that was false, because this is what happens every time with the Gray Zone and every other outlet that doesn't drink the party, that doesn't drink the Kool-Aid and challenges the party line. You get accused of parroting whatever the bad guy enemy state is of the day, Russia, China, whoever it is, without any evidence to back it up. So you can just call, like, it's basically like saying that we have cooties. It's the equivalent of that, saying that we have cooties. You don't have to validate anything. You don't have to prove any point. You just say they've been criticized for putting up pro-Russian propaganda, and therefore we should be ignored and dismissed. And that's just the standard journalistic tactic of Fox News and every other McCarthyite outlet. And it's funny because here you have a Democratic senator, Chris Coons. He's a staunch ally of Biden. What does Fox News brand itself as? It's like they're constantly going after Biden and his allies. But this is an example, and this happens all the time in foreign policy, where when you have the holy Israeli state, this client state of Israel, this client state of the U.S., which does the U.S.'s bidding, which the bipartisan establishment is firmly behind. The moment somebody criticizes U.S. support for Israel, the bipartisan or the partisan rifts are gone, and now all of a sudden Fox News is rushing to Senator Coons' defense and celebrating the fact that he got me kicked off a train. Look how giddy that host is. Whatever, Steve Ducey, is that his name? I think that's his name. Look, he's like, did he get kicked off the train? As if, you know, that like it's like made his day that I got kicked off the train.
Did he get kicked off the train?
So it just shows that the so-called partisan divide is a joke. Yeah, they fight over some cultural issues and things like abortion, but when it comes to foreign policy, the real decisions that impact the world and the future of the world that speak to U.S. hegemony, they're firmly united.
And the hypocrisy now, I know you've been witnessing this, and all the opposition to Ukraine funding, and then absolutely nothing on this issue of the U.S. handing blank checks to Israel. But I wanted, they mentioned in that video, unorthodox journalism. Your journalism was never going to be orthodox. What do you think they mean by that?
Well, orthodox just simply means their brand of journalism, which is just parroting whatever the government says when it comes to foreign policy, because U.S. foreign policy is hegemony, and hegemony is how the U.S. derives its identity and derives its power and its whole way of looking at the world. And whether it's Fox News or CNN or MSNBC, there's pretty much uniform acceptance of that, with some exceptions sometimes on some issues. Like Fox News will sometimes dissent about Ukraine. MSNBC will sometimes dissent when it comes to Israel. But overall, the fundamental premise of U.S. hegemony is not questioned. And thus, anybody who does question U.S. hegemony doesn't accept it as a starting point through which to look at everything. Like the lens through which we have to judge everything is like presupposing that U.S. hegemony is legitimate. Anybody who doesn't accept that is now unorthodox and questionable and must be somehow supportive of all these foreign governments that we're trying to destabilize or overthrow.
Yes, and perhaps we can zoom out a bit now. You wrote a recent article in your Substack. I'll pull it up. Biden's personal attachment to Israel fuels its massacres in Gaza. And you talk about how senior officials admit Gaza's death toll could be an undercount, while the White House refuses to condition U.S. military support to Israel and cloaks it in secrecy. So could you talk about the personal attachment Biden and perhaps the neocons in general have to Israel that has led to kind of fundamental shifts in the way war happens? Because you mentioned in the article that this U.S. support right now, especially militarily, is almost completely secret. We don't actually have numbers, unlike in Ukraine, where we did have these spending packages that went public and people could react to. So I'll kick it back to you.
Yeah, this is amazing. The Pentagon will not disclose exactly how much military aid it's given to Israel since October 7th, which is just unbelievable. I mean, think about what that is saying. That's saying that we're going to arm this mass murder campaign, and we're also not going to tell you exactly how we're arming it. And it's understandable why people in the government would not want the public to know the extent of U.S. military support, because it's overwhelming. Israel could not do what it's doing without U.S. military and diplomatic support. So accordingly, because it's committing mass murder of civilians, the U.S. does not want people to know the extent of it. But it's crazy that they can get away with that. I mean, we're the ones, the public are paying for this. It's done with our tax dollars. It's done in our name. At minimum, we should know the extent of it, and they're keeping that from us. And look at the objection there is right now in the media. It's mentioned, but there's not a big controversy around it. I don't see Congress much of an effort there trying to even get some basic accountability. There's been some talk of it, but not really. And this comes as the Biden administration has been doing this really cynical PR campaign where they pretend to care about Palestinian lives while still refusing to do a single thing about saving them. And actually, the only action it's taking is accelerating the mass murder. And so Biden has to pretend, and his aides have to pretend as if they care about Palestinian lives and they're doing something. But that line about Biden's personal attachment, that comes from a Washington Post article about this issue of the Biden administration's basically PR efforts to make it look as if they care about Gaza. And there's a line in there where the Post says that according to administration officials, the only thing the U.S. could actually do to make any, I shouldn't say the only thing, the major thing that the U.S. could do to impact Israel and get it to stop would be conditioning military aid. And the Biden administration says that that's a non-starter. And the reason why the Post explains is twofold. One, they say that the administration worries that conditioning military aid to Israel would be, quote, politically unpopular, which is such a lie. According to all the surveys, a majority of Americans support a ceasefire. And so what they mean by politically unpopular is not among the actual populace, but they mean among the bipartisan establishment, the Israel lobby, and weapons manufacturers. That's the political constituency that matters in Washington, not their actual voters who are supposed to be ignored and are supposed to be kept from knowing the basics about how much money they're spending on arming this mass murder campaign. And then the Post goes on to say that also Biden has a personal attachment to Israel, which is just such a stunning line. So because Biden has a personal attachment to Israel, that means we're going to continue fueling this mass murder campaign. And what do they mean by personal attachment? They mean that Biden is a loyal servant of the bipartisan establishment who understands that Israel is a client state that is used to enforce U.S. hegemony. It's been used to smash Arab nationalism. It's used to threaten countries like Iran, which are a deterrent to U.S. hegemony. And it's been used to do the U.S.'s dirty work when there's too much heat on the U.S. So, for example, arming and training death squads in Central America. Sometimes Israel's been used for that purpose when it's too, it looks bad for the U.S. to do it. So basically, Israel's like a loyal capo for the U.S. mafia don. So that's Biden's personal attachment to Israel, and which also means he has a personal detachment, or in fact, personal contempt for Palestinian humanity. If you're so attached to Israel that you're willing to support genocide. So that is the real reality of the Biden administration, and their attempts to sometimes pretend as if they care about Palestinian lives are just so transparently false and so unbelievably cynical.
Yeah, indeed. And I think what's been stunning too, and perhaps I definitely want your take of how you've been understanding this. For Bernie Sanders, right? Like we've both been, of course, we've both been in circles and we, are friends with many people, and we ourselves have been very critical of Bernie Sanders and the squad over the years. But there's also, the fact that you had Rashida Tlaib get censured by Congress. Of course, we defend Rashida Tlaib for that's a massive violation, not just of free speech, but of course her right to defend the Palestinian people and use her platform to do so, use her leadership to do so. But you have Bernie Sanders not even calling for a ceasefire, my understanding, as of even today. And, there have been protests. I know Code Pink led a protest outside of his office where they were summarily pushed out, if not escorted out by security. I mean, what's been your reaction to this? Because for all of Bernie Sanders' flaws, this feels like an even further lurch to a position that I'm actually quite surprised by in terms of not even being able to articulate a ceasefire, which, as you said, Aaron, is quite popular among the U.S. population, voting population as a whole, which tend to run more conservative than Bernie Sanders on this issue.
Yeah, I don't know who Bernie Sanders really is at this point. I've never met him. I know that in the 1980s, he took some really brave stances about U.S. foreign policy, opposing the dirty wars in Central America, calling for rapprochement and talks between the U.S. and the Soviet Union at a time when that wasn't popular to say. So he has a history of taking some principled stances. But then he goes to Congress and then the Senate, and then we know his record from the Senate. He supported the NATO bombing of Serbia. I know that. I believe he voted for one of the regime change resolutions when it came to Iraq, but he ultimately opposed the Iraq war. And then in 2014, just keeping the issue of Israel, when he was confronted by constituents during the summer massacres by Israel in Gaza in the summer of 2014, he defended Israel and said Israel has a right to defend itself and shouted at people who were criticizing him for it. And then 2016 comes and now he's running against Hillary Clinton in the primary. And at the time I thought, okay, he's undergone a personal transformation because now he's speaking out for Palestine. But now you have to wonder, since he won't even bring himself to call for a ceasefire, which is like the minimal thing you can do, was his stance in 2016, was that just him trying to get the Muslim vote in Michigan, where he was running a primary against Hillary Clinton? I don't know. But regardless, what he's doing now is it's just pathetic beyond words. And he is so feckless and so bankrupt on this issue that even AIPAC is tweeting him out. When he opposed a ceasefire recently, AIPAC tweeted out the clip of him on CNN. And somehow that hasn't sunk into his brain that he's a dupe and he's completely immoral on this. If AIPAC is promoting you, that's got to tell you you're on the wrong side. But he's still doubling down. So he has this new statement where he's calling for a significant humanitarian pause. Before he was calling for just a humanitarian pause. I believe now this is the first time he's adding the word significant. And him and his aides want us to think that him saying the word significant is somehow significant. A humanitarian pause is a joke term, even if you add the word significant in front of it. It's a joke. It just means pausing the mass murder. And he's also endorsing the Genocide Joe Netanyahu position, which is that we have to have regime change in Gaza, which means endless military assault and displacing even more people, killing even more people. So that's Bernie Sanders. And wanted to bring himself to call for a ceasefire. And the people to blame for this is not just Bernie. He has a foreign policy aide named Max Hoffman, who's pretty much a carbon copy of his predecessor, Matt Duss. Both these guys come from the think tank world in D.C. Matt Duss, after leaving Bernie Sanders' office, is taking positions at these sort of mainstream think tanks and, adopting, where Matt Duss was praising Joe Biden for his stance on Ukraine, saying Biden had the responsible progressive position. After reports came out, the Biden administration blocked a peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine in March, April 2022. Matt Duss was like running cover for them and saying, "Oh, don't believe that. It's not true." No matter how much evidence comes out from Ukrainian officials, from the former Israeli prime minister who brokered these talks, from a NATO, from a Turkish foreign minister, from Ukrainian sources close to Zelensky, from U.S. officials who did confirm there was a peace deal, Matt Duss is still out there running cover and saying, "No, all this is not true. It's Russia that So that's the type of people that Bernie Sanders has been hiring as his foreign policy brains, and accordingly, this is the kind of mealy-mouthed, weak statements we're getting from Bernie Sanders, who is such a disappointment. At one point, I really did believe in his campaign, and I don't want to take away from the good it accomplished. Like, you have to credit him for, in 2016, speaking powerfully about Palestinian rights. That was good. He also got universal health care really into the conversation more than anybody else has, I think. So I don't want to take away from his accomplishments, but with what he's doing now, he's completely sullying his noble legacy, or the parts of his legacy that are noble, because it's not entirely noble, but it's sad to watch.
Yeah, in moments like these, I mean, this is a historic crisis, a massacre, a genocide, and these moments tend to expose where we really fall. And so, I know I only have a few more minutes, so maybe your last comment on, I know you come out of the progressive media world and you went independent. And I've been noticing, Democracy Now!, while they of course have coverage that's sympathetic to Palestinians, they also do a lot of both sides stuff. They have Matt Duss on frequently. Actually, I think they've had him a few times on to talk about this issue. Overall, your reaction to the state of media, especially independent media, around this question of Palestine, and where do you think things are going, given that you've given so many years to this particular issue, and now we're in this historic crisis? Where do you think things are going from here around this question? Big question.
Well, so in terms of media, I have to credit Democracy Now! I've been very critical of their coverage on so many issues that I care about: the Syria dirty war, the Ukraine proxy war, Russiagate, where I thought they totally dropped the ball, and I couldn't believe some of the people they put on, the lines they took, and that was disgraceful. And they've been called out, not just by me, but by many people. But on Gaza, I thought they've done really good stuff. I don't think they've been both sidesing. I think they've been great, and I think like the Democracy Now! That I've seen of them on Gaza, I haven't seen everything, but what I've seen, that was the Democracy Now! That I grew up on, that I worked at, and that I really believed in. And so I've been heartened to see that. I do think when they brought on Matt Duss recently, that was like they broke their winning streak on Gaza, because Matt Duss defended Bernie Sanders' opposition to a ceasefire with a ridiculous answer, and basically saying that Hamas can't be negotiated with, and he wasn't challenged. And if you're going to claim that Hamas can't be negotiated with because of things they've said about Israel and things they've done, then basically you're endorsing what Israel has done, because what Israel's done is exponentially worse than anything Hamas has ever done. Because Israel, first of all, is the occupying power. They're the ones who have refused to actually accept minimal Palestinian rights throughout their entire existence. They've never offered Palestinians their minimal rights, which would basically be a state in the occupied territories, which the Palestinian leadership, including Hamas, have accepted. And Israel are such fanatics that they can't even bring themselves to offer Palestinians that, which, by the way, if ever that were accepted by Palestinians, would be a huge compromise for them, because that's only a state in 22% of their historic land. And Israel, being the fanatics really in charge here with U.S. backing, can never bring themselves to even offer Palestinians that, and are committing so many acts of violence. But yet Matt Duss wants to say that because Hamas commits violence and says incendiary things, we can't negotiate them, we can't have a ceasefire. So that's basically an acceptance of the premise that Israel has the right to occupy these people, and it's only those who resist occupation, that their actions are the ones that deserve like our moral judgment and mean that they can't be negotiated with, whereas Israel somehow has legitimacy as an occupying power. So it's an insanely fanatical statement to make, and I was sorry to see that said on Democracy Now! without pushback. But aside from that, I actually want to give them credit, because I think that they've done great work on Gaza. In terms of where this conflict is going, we're dealing with a fanatical supremacist regime with the full green light of the U.S., and so they're going to displace as many people as they can. They're going to kill as many people as they can because their goal, I think, is to make Gaza uninhabitable. They don't want people to come back. They've long wanted to expel people from Gaza. There's been reports already that Egypt has been asked by Netanyahu to take in hundreds of thousands or millions of people into the Sinai. So that's Israel's goal, is ethnic cleansing. And that's why they're destroying hospitals, they're destroying water infrastructure, sewage infrastructure, everything to make Gaza unlivable, because this is a fanatical regime operating with the full green light of the US. And, one day I would like to hear from Hamas what exactly they intended with this operation on October 7th. I suspect that they did not intend for it to go as it did in terms of civilians being killed. At least I like to hope that, because I'd like to hope that people who are resisting have some strategic thinking. And I think the way this went, for the way this has gone right now, I think from my point of view, has been a huge strategic setback for the cause of Palestinian freedom. I do. I have to say that about Hamas. I don't know what they were thinking. I'd like to hear them explain it. And maybe they have, and I haven't heard it. But of course, none of that justifies what Israel is doing. It's unspeakable. But I don't understand what they were thinking here. If they were just thinking maybe they were going to kidnap some Israeli or capture some Israeli soldiers, fair enough. I understand that, because that's yielded success before, where you've had one Israeli soldier traded for hundreds of imprisoned Palestinians. But this, to me, is a disaster. And I don't see how this has at all brought Palestinians closer to freedom. But I would love to hear the argument about that one day. It's not the time right now, I guess, for these discussions. And I myself, I'm not living under occupation, so there are huge limits and constraints on my opinion. Like, it doesn't really matter what I think. But I do have that question. And for now, though, the immediate task is stopping the Israeli assault and doing everything we can to stop Israel from its goals of just making Gaza uninhabitable.
Yeah. I mean, it is unclear. I think, there have been so many arguments and debates about what happened on October 7th, and the fighting going on now. But it is true that the toll has been huge, and it's unclear how much it can be predicted, how hard Israel would come down. But obviously, I think your point is also good too about this exchange. Like, it's obvious that Hamas wanted an exchange of some kind because of everything that Hamas had been saying prior to October 7th about Al-Quds, about the prisoners. But it's also clear that this was always going to be an unequal war, and we're seeing the results of that now. But I know I know that you have to go, so I wanted to give you time to just outline where people can find your work, and anything else you'd like to say to end.
I'm at the Gray Zone, thegrayzone.com, and I also host a podcast with Katie Halper called Useful Idiots. And you can find me on Twitter too. And Danny, thanks for having me.
Of course, yes. Thanks for joining me on your Friday afternoon. I'll be sure to share out also aaronmate.net, where people can find your articles and announcements and things like that too. So thanks so much, Aaron. Have a good one.
You too. Good to see you.
All right. Take care. Bye. All right. So that was the litany of guests we had on today. Busy time. We have 1,800 viewers still on. That was a great talk. We could have probably talked about the merits versus the non-merits of what Hamas ended up operating on October 7th. But of course, both of us are on the outside of this. I am still, of course, unclear about strategy amongst the resistance, and there's so many different theories about why, but nonetheless, the fighting is going on right now, and while the casualties are high, the deaths are high, this is a genocide. It is also clear that in any moment in history for a colonized population, there are going to be inflection points, and whether we think that the decision to take action was correct or not, we know that it's going to be taken nonetheless, because an occupied people, a colonized people, will not stand down forever and undergo some kind of slow rolling catastrophe and death, that eventually there will be conflict, there will be confrontation. And I think this is one of those moments, regardless of what you think about Hamas, whether you think it's a legitimate resistance organization or not. I'm always baffled by the fact that the United States and Israel both supported Hamas as a legitimate political party in those elections many years ago during the Bush administration, and yet now it's being talked about like it's some kind of illegitimate organization, when in fact it was supported as the legitimate leadership of Gaza, mainly because they didn't want other organizations to be in that role. So now they're being talked about as if they can't be negotiated with. And again, this is why it's so important to note that Israel is completely and entirely at fault here, regardless of whatever you think Hamas did, is because all parties involved who are now on the offensive in Gaza, especially the US and Israel, have an easy pathway towards settling this by actually negotiating with Hamas, because it was supported as the primary political entity in Gaza. So with all of that said, everybody, it is about 1:41 p.m. right now where I lay. We have 1,600 viewers still. So what I want to do is I want to cover, to close the stream, the China situation, because I need to react to that, and I might not be live for a while. So I want to talk about Xi Jinping's visit to the United States, to San Francisco. And I want to, because there was an incredible moment, all right, incredible moment that occurred during this, where the United States essentially sabotaged this, okay? So they sabotaged their own diplomacy, and guess who was at the front and center of this? Well, you had Joe Biden, of course. Unsurprising. So let's get right to it, okay? Because this was absolutely just incredible what happened here. And, this meeting just ended, right? Xi Jinping is now no longer meeting with Joe Biden. But let's get started, okay? Because this was something. So in the week of November 10th to the 17th, the APEC summit happened. The Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit occurred in San Francisco. And of course, the big news was Xi Jinping, who arrived at November 13th, and then he held a summit with Joe Biden shortly thereafter. Many, many talks he presented to U.S. businesses. There was a lot of enthusiasm about this visit. And so Xi Jinping and Joe Biden met over this week, and there was a lot of hope that this meeting would steer relations in the correct direction, meaning that the relations would soften and they would ease. Now, the results of the meeting, if we're taken at surface level, were relatively fruitful. I think they fall very short on what really needs to happen for U.S.-China relations to actually become better, to actually improve, to ease. But it wasn't nothing. There were changes that were made. You had, on the U.S. side, the willingness to, and here is the story with this, you had the U.S. side willing to move a little bit on sanctions. So here the Global Times says that the U.S. removes Chinese institutions from entity lists over narcotics, a practice to rectify errors. So the U.S. government announced on Thursday it will remove the Institute of Forensic Science of China's Ministry of Public Security from the entity list and lift the sanctions. The decision took effect on Thursday, November 16th, according to the Office of the China Narcotics Control Commission on Friday. Experts say that China welcomes the move and believe both countries should engage in careful negotiations around counter-narcotics issues. So, in a sense, you could say this is a positive move around sanctions, but let's be honest, there are hundreds of economic entities, more important entities in the tech sector, including Huawei, that are experiencing sanctions from the United States. And of course, none of that was addressed. And on the other side, on the military side, you had the US and China reestablish military communications on both sides that had been paused since that absolutely laughable balloon incident, the so-called spy balloon incident back in February of 2023, which brought relations to a historic low so poorly that Xi Jinping actually spent months and months and months, really up until this point, not taking the calls of US President Joe Biden. So it wasn't as if nothing happened during this trip. There were negotiations, there were fruitful dialogue, in both sides in their readouts indicated as much. However, as you have heard on this program over and over and over again, I have been following the diplomatic, or what I call faux diplomatic ventures of the United States toward China, because I am of not just the opinion, but I think this is supported by fact, that the United States actually isn't interested in easing relations at all. That actually what it wants to do is continue its Cold War aggression toward China, with the optics simply changing ahead of the November 2024 elections. And so the United States has been conducting what I call faux diplomacy. You've had Antony Blinken. So this is about a 6 to 8 month period. You had Antony Blinken visit China, Janet Yellen visit China twice, actually, Gina Raimondo visit China. You had many U.S. officials. You had Wang Yi come to the United States and visit Biden before the APEC summit. So you've had many of these meetings, but very little results. The most actually that China got out of these meetings before the APEC summit was a working group established by the United States and China to talk about economic issues, and perhaps some strong and lofty rhetoric about how decoupling is not beneficial for either side. That's it. That's all that China ever received. So really, there weren't any concessions made at all for the Chinese side. And almost in each instance, U.S. diplomacy was sabotaged from the very beginning. You may remember the first visit of Antony Blinken back in the spring, the late spring of 2023. He went to Beijing and the talks were very cordial, according to the readout. Then Joe Biden goes to the Western mainstream media, goes to the U.S. mainstream media, and he calls Xi Jinping a dictator. Janet Yellen goes to China, when I was in China, actually, in July. As she is going to China, the U.S. Department of State issues a travel warning for all Americans to be careful about traveling to China. Kind of a strange thing to do when your Secretary of Treasury is going to negotiate with the highest levels of China's cabinet. Then you had Gina Raimondo go to China later on in the summer of 2023. And she comes back shocked at what she found when it came to the Huawei Mate Pro 60, after she had discussed how China and the US need to essentially rectify issues where they can rectify them. She comes back and she tells the media that she's shocked and appalled about Huawei's ability to build advanced chips and release a phone to skirt US sanctions. So in each and every instance, the United States, the neocons, they undermined US so-called diplomacy. They sank relations back to the level where they were before, because all of this, in my opinion, is a ruse. It's an act. It's all about covering for the US's other crises abroad, Ukraine, and now you have Gaza absolutely on fire because of US failures in both regions. So let me pull up the latest in what is the diplomatic catastrophe that is the United States and the neocon foreign policy establishment. So directly after Joe Biden met with the president of China, Xi Jinping, he gave a press conference and he was asked a very specific question. And now you have to watch Antony Blinken's face, because this is priceless, absolutely priceless, this reaction, because I think it gets into the reality of what we are seeing in terms of U.S. decline and its failed attempts to maintain some kind of public relations image as it essentially sets fire to the world. So here is Joe Biden being ask a question to the press. And here is how Antony Blinken reacted to Joe Biden's response.
Mr. President, after today, would you still refer to President Xi as a dictator? This is a term that you used earlier this year.
Well, look, he is. I mean, he's a dictator in the sense that he is the guy who's run the country that is.
He didn't look too happy there, did he? So let's turn back the clock a little bit, okay? Let's turn back the clock because we have to see this again.
Xi as a dictator. This is a term that you used earlier this year.
Well, look, he is. I mean, he's a dictator in the sense.
So that's the face of the American empire crashing and burning. Now, what's interesting about this is that Blinken has played his huge role in being one of the worst diplomats, if not the worst diplomat in U.S. history, to be thrust into many different historic crises and over again fail again and again to stabilize the U.S.'s position in the world is an utter failure, regardless of whether his role is supposed to be a stenographer and a water carrier for war, which he is, and that's what the Department of State has always been, but in recent years has intensified and become. Doesn't matter. The fact is that that's the face of failure. This is the face of failure. This is the face of the United States setting their entire position in the world ablaze. And for what? For Joe Biden? I mean, this does not feel scripted. There were the Mint Press published a video of Joe Biden in another press conference talking about Hamas. It might have been the same one, actually, getting questions about Hamas. And he starts talking about the hostages, and Blinken is shaking his head no. And Joe Biden says, "Oh, I know, Mr. Secretary, I'm not supposed to say anything else." This is what we're dealing with here. This is what we're dealing with here. So in effect, we are screwed. But this is what happened. So let's watch it one more time because we have to watch it one more time. I mean, this is gold.
Mr. President, after today, would you still refer to President Xi as a dictator? This is a term that you used earlier this year.
Well, look, he is. I mean, he's a dictator in the sense that he is the guy who's run the country that is communist country that is based on a form of government totally different than ours.
So there you have it. What else is there to say? It's completely undone. The United States, in just a comment to the press, completely undid what was supposed to be a relatively drama-free APEC summit. It was supposed to be a signature of the United States where the United States, the Joe Biden administration, can talk about how it actually accomplished something on the diplomatic front, especially with China. This was supposed to be an opportunity for the United States, with all of the failures happening, the United States failing to exercise any kind of strength when it comes to the Gaza war, when it comes to the brutal war on Gaza, the entire region, the so-called Middle East, but let's call it West Asia. The U.S. can't assert anything. The United States, on the one hand, is announcing that it's worried about being pulled into a broader war, and on the other side is doing everything it can to ignite a broader war with Iran and Hezbollah. That's what the United States is doing. It has absolutely no control over Israel. Israel is basically doing whatever the heck it wants right now. It's doing whatever it wants. And so that's a diplomatic failure because Netanyahu's going on the mainstream media every single day in the West, and especially in the United States. And he's doing exactly what he did in U.S. Congress at the end of the Obama administration. He is lashing out at the United States, at President Biden in particular, who he never really liked because they stand on the opposite wings of the same bird of the foreign policy establishment. He is going and talking and lambasting Joe Biden, how ineffective he is and how he can do whatever he wants. And he doesn't have any real fears in the world about the United States because they're getting blank checks. And of course, the Biden administration is exercising zero diplomacy at all. The region, too. every single time Blinken goes to the region outside of meeting with the Israeli government, no one really wants to talk to Blinken. Why is that? Well, what are they offering? They're offering nothing. They're not allowing for any kind of ceasefire. They're not supporting what they claim to have supported for years, the UN resolution on a Palestinian state, a two-state solution. No, none of that. They're giving nothing to the region. In fact, they're escalating while trying to claim that they are on the right side of this conflict, that they care about civilian deaths and all of that. So and then there's Ukraine. They're failing in Ukraine. The Ukraine conflict is finished. It's over. The counteroffensive, forget it. It's history. We don't even have to talk about it anymore. The fighting is frozen. Russia is progressing. Ukraine has nothing left. The United States doesn't even pretend that it does. And now there are rumors that they're trying to covertly push for peace, while, of course, maintaining the same stance that it always has. Russia, the aggressor. We're not going to ever sue for peace. There's going to be no peace until Ukraine wins everything. Right? So failure after failure, monumental ones. And then you have, of course, now China, where there was an opportunity to, with much time left in the elections, I predict that all of this was going to be unwritten anyway come the 2024 election. If you watched the 2020 election in the United States, then you know Joe Biden and Donald Trump vied and competed hard for who could be tougher on China. And so there's absolutely no hope for the United States to change anything policy-wise around that period, because the United States, both political parties, are going to use China as a political issue because they need to satisfy the neocons, the Pentagon, and all of it. They need to satisfy the neocon foreign policy establishment, the military contractors, for an election campaign, and aggression toward China is very profitable toward those ends. So this was always temporary anyway. But the fact that the Biden administration is likely to end its first and maybe only term in the White House with zero foreign policy signatures, zero foreign policy achievements. You had Obama with the Iran nuclear deal. You had Trump with his attempt to play at dynamics in the Korean Peninsula, which really opportunistically trying to take advantage of the fact that you had a South Korean government willing to negotiate with the DPRK for a normalization process. The fact that Donald Trump was able to do those things and Joe Biden can't seem to get anywhere with anything, I think goes to show that this has become a historic moment of crisis from which Biden was never prepared to address. And Biden himself, in my opinion, represents this conflict amongst the neocons, right? Represents this utter decline that the United States has found itself in, and that China now has to deal with constantly. And many people wonder, why did Xi Jinping go to San Francisco? You could say now, yeah, good question, because the United States doesn't seem, or it never seems to be, a good faith actor, not even when it desperately needs to be one. Joe Biden desperately needed this. Joe Biden desperately needed something that gave the impression to the world that the United States is not just run by a bunch of warmongering lunatics. Seriously, this is important on the world stage. If there's something that you need to learn about geopolitics and maybe don't know yet, it's that how nation states, especially a system like the United States, which is predicated upon war and profiteering, right? This neoliberal imperial system, a system like that, it does matter how you look to the world. There's a reason why the United States constantly tries to position itself as the democracy of the world, as the leader of democracy, as a fighter for freedom, as the kind of stable genocidaire, right? There's a reason why the United States does that as the hegemon, because the hegemon needs to look the part of a murderer in a nice suit, right? It has to look like Psycho, if you've ever seen that movie. You have to look like that, right? American Psycho. I don't know if anyone's watched that movie, but you got to look like that. You got to look the part, because if you don't, well, how are you even going to build support amongst your client states, let alone those peoples in those nations that are sick and tired of being under the thumb of U.S. hegemony? You're not going to get it. The United States is even on a thin line when it comes to these so-called client states, these monarchies in the region, as Lowkey stated on this program. It's the fact that a lot of these monarchies have already been normal with Israel, have already kind of tied themselves up in knots around Israel, that makes it possible for both a process of reconciliation and normalization among countries like Iran and Saudi Arabia possible, while these same countries do very little on behalf of Palestine. It's because there's so much intertwined here, and Israel is very intertwined with the KSA, with the monarchy in Bahrain, and on and on and on. So the United States desperately needed a signature, desperately needed a victory. But how could the United States get a diplomatic victory with people like this? Look at this. This is pathetic. Mint Press News reported that in this same press conference, Joe Biden was asked about Israeli prisoners of war, and this is what he had to say.
We've gotten great cooperation from the Qataris. I've spoken with them as well a number of times. I think the pause and that the Israelis have agreed to, it's down to, well, I'm getting too much detail. I know, Mr. Secretary, I'm going to stop. But I am mildly hopeful.
So, I mean, is there anything else to say? Joe Biden is not, I mean, he was never well. But really what this speaks to is that the neocon foreign policy establishment is not well. And why is it not well? Well, because it is partially headed by people like Joe Biden, who are not physically well, mentally well, let alone possessing of the leadership needed to do this kind of thing, manipulate situations, keep up a certain public relations image for the American empire. But here you have literally Joe Biden being directed by Antony Blinken. It's almost as if he is being propped up in more ways than we could have imagined, because we all know that U.S. presidents, who they work for, they don't work for people. They don't work for ordinary people. They work for big corporations, military contractors, warmongering careerists in the political establishment, lobby groups, etc. We can go on and on and on. The point is, we know they don't work for us. But at the same time, to watch even the inability to function on that premise of needing to promote and project an image of the American empire, one that cloaks the American empire in democracy and stability and feasibility, desirability, all of these things are gone. They're gone. They have burst asunder, and they'll still remain gone regardless of who wins in 2024, Biden, Trump. It doesn't matter. We've listened to Donald Trump. If anyone's listened to Donald Trump up until this point, if the situation in Gaza is where it's at under Donald Trump, it's going to continue and maybe even worsen. That's just the rhetoric that's coming out. And if you don't believe Donald Trump, well, and you want to read into actions, just like Democrats read into actions that aren't actually true, read into words that aren't actually meaningful. I tend to believe Donald Trump when he says things like, a drop of American blood spilt will end up gallons of blood for you, when he's targeting Gaza. That's what he's talking about. I tend to believe him. And and that's what's happening right now anyway. So why do we think it's going to change? In any event, the visit that Joe Biden conducted in China, or I mean the meeting between Xi Jinping and himself, Joe Biden, exposed a lot. It exposed, on the one hand, that the United States really is trying to project an image of stability, while at the same time possessing no capacity to actually do so. That face that you saw Antony Blinken express is not the face of someone who actually does have the ability to do this. who actually does have the skills required? No. Antony Blinken is not that. Look at what Antony Blinken has done. Goes to Kiev, goes to West Asia. What comes out of it? More of the same. No changes. Nothing. Just the same failures, the same catastrophes, just a different moment. And so when Antony Blinken makes that face, it's because even people like him understand how bad the situation is. You don't get moments like this very often. You're supposed to play a part in this. I'm surprised, actually. Actually, I'm not surprised because everything I've said indicates that they're just not good at what they do. They're not good at playing a role. It's like watching a bad movie. And what's surprising, though, is that they're not even aware the movie is rolling. I mean, Joe Biden certainly isn't aware. But Antony Blinken, the neocons, they're not aware of which direction this movie is going, where the plot is going to end. It's not going to end in eternal U.S. supremacy. The more that the United States provokes China, the more likely it is that China will pursue self-reliance on its own. This is already happening. This is why Raimondo was so shocked about the Huawei Mate Pro 60. It's an astonishing accomplishment of self-reliance. It's why the United States cannot stop sanctioning Chinese tech, stop sanctioning China's renewable energy industry. It can't stop building up around Taiwan. Because on all of these questions, all of these issues are expressions of China's self-reliance, China's independent willingness and capacity to peacefully reunify with Taiwan, China's ability to build technology to address environmental issues, global climate catastrophe, all of that. China's ability to build up its own tech industry without the help of the United States. Has China's tech industry really been hampered? I mean, it's slowed down. There have been some developments where things have slowed down in certain sectors, including the chip industry. But at the same time, China is obviously accelerating in other areas, which is allowing it to do things like subvert sanctions. So the United States is what a lot of people call shooting itself in the foot. It did so with Russia with the sanctions. Russia's economy is stable. It's growing at a faster pace than Europe, almost twice as fast. These are the consequences of a failed imperial regime. The neocons are leading and sailing a sinking ship. And they don't even have the capacity to be aware of it because the compass is only pointing in one direction, and that is war and more war. And we have come to a juncture in history, and everything around U.S.-China relations exposes this, that the United States, the elite, the political class, the foreign policy establishment, whether they're aware of it or not, they don't have anything left but war. They have a massive military arsenal that they've outstretched in the Ukraine conflict. They weren't ready for that kind of war, but they've built up a military arsenal that allows them to continue on the path of conflict everywhere. And wherever it starts up, they're ready to go, even if they don't have enough to make a decisive decision to alter the course of history, right? They don't have the capacity to alter the course of history in West Asia. No, they're not defeating Iran, Hezbollah. Palestinian people will continue to resist. They don't have the ability to tip the scales there. They don't have the ability to tip the scales in Ukraine. Russia's going to win that war. They don't have the ability to tip the scales in the Asia Pacific. Most countries in the Asia Pacific, even so-called adversaries to China, South Korea, Japan, they are holding on for dear life to economic relations with China because they know that if they decouple from China, the economic deterioration they're already experiencing will only accelerate. There was a massive impact on South Korea, trade deficit forming in South Korea because of their willingness to go along with the U.S. export ban of semiconductor technology. It's already harmed South Korea's economy, and both South Korea, Japan, even countries like the Philippines, which have a rogue leadership that are willing to provoke China in the South China Sea, they know that they need economic relations nonetheless. So the United States doesn't have the ability to tip the scales there. They've done everything they can. The governments of Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, I mean, these governments are as client state-esque, as compliant and as loyal as they could be. Israel, look at what Israel is doing. That's all that they're going to get, is a regime like that leading the charge in the Israeli government. Ukraine didn't get any better than Zelensky. He did everything they said for him to do. And then when the going got rough, well, Zelensky got rough because he is not a talented person. Clients are not talented people. They're not. He's not a talented actor. He couldn't handle the pressure of what it meant for Russia to be making the progress that it had been making over the last months and months and months and months of this conflict. Didn't have the ability to face up to defeat. The United States, of course, is not a good teacher. It doesn't teach its pets and its puppets how to act. Look at Netanyahu. He's supposed to be a U.S. puppet, believe me. But it's not the case. It's not the case. So regionally, everywhere, worldwide, this is what you call the end game, the end, the final act, the crumbling of the American empire. Antony Blinken's face is an expression of that. Antony Blinken's face shows us that the American empire is, in fact, crumbling, that there is nothing left that it can do to salvage its power, to salvage its hegemony. Antony Blinken's face is what most in the U.S. foreign policy establishment are feeling. They can type up or they can go into interviews and play the part much better than Blinken. Blinken should have been paying attention to his face, to be honest. They can play the role. They can talk big, arrogantly, with the hubris, the exceptionalism. Oh, they can talk. But when it comes to the back rooms, these are the conversations they're having. What are we going to do? How are we going to make this work? Even The Economist is talking about, is American power dispensable? This is the question that's on the minds of a lot of the elite. This is why they are rapidly accelerating catastrophe after catastrophe. Ukraine, Gaza, China, right? What kind of catastrophe would that be? So U.S.-China relations are really no better than they were before the APEC summit. And whatever small progress was made in establishing some concrete steps to changing policy, they have been undone by simple words from the Biden administration. The simple words of Xi Jinping is a dictator. To have very little awareness that such a comment essentially insults the very person that you had went to painstaking lengths to meet with. I mean, this was the invitation of the Biden administration. This was supposed to be Biden's moment. And to make those comments, whether he's aware of the fact that he was going to make them or not, whether he always had hoped and planned, whatever's going on in that addled brain of Joe Biden's, it doesn't really matter. The fact is that because it happened, we are exposed to the reality that it was never meant to be. There was never going to be improved relations. The overall trajectory of U.S. policy, of the hegemon toward China, is containment leading to war. Containment is always going to fail. War is the only pathway. That's why the U.S. continues to militarize the Asia Pacific, and that's why Taiwan continues to be a flashpoint. So I'll end with the face. We got to end with this face, all right? Let's end with the face of failure in the face of decline.
President, after today, would you still refer to President Xi as a dictator? This is a term that you used earlier this year.
Well, look, he is. I mean, he's a dictator.
There it is. The face of failure in the face of decline. The face of a crumbling empire, crashing and burning, and attempting to take all of us with it. And the point is here is that we got to get rid of these people. We got to make sure that this order changes, and this order changes fast, so we don't all go down with it, because that's the ultimate pathway, especially for the collective West, which tends to think of itself as immune from what the United States and NATO, etc., do around the world. It's never been the case. We are all suffering for it as well. We are paying the price. That face is only an indication of where the elite sit right now. But the conditions that people are facing all over the world, Gaza is a manifestation of the most extreme form of cruelty. But that cruelty is happening all over the world, including in the collective West, where people are unable to meet basic needs in the most extravagantly so-called wealthy parts of the world, the so-called industrialized world. We're seeing the decline happen on all ends, in all spheres. And so that face is one that we need to never see again. So we got to get to it. That's it, everybody. Good stream today. Friday afternoon tends to be a little slower, but I try to accommodate, especially for the folks out where east, out whether it's all the way east China, whether we're talking about the UK where Lowkey is. I try to be accommodating. In terms of announcements, I'll do some super chats and then I'll leave here. I'll probably be back streaming. I mean, if I'm enthusiastic, Sunday, but maybe Monday. And I'll be working on things as well with guests and whatnot. But definitely a solo stream or two to come up as I prepare for other things. The holiday season's coming up, of course, in the United States and I think much of the West. So maybe a slowdown, but clips will happen. Maybe, we'll see. In any event, you can look out for me probably Monday. And I'm going to do some shout outs. But before I do, first off, the best way to support this channel for free, of course, is liking the stream, subscribing to the channel, and hitting that notifications bell. If you're on Rockfin and Rumble, or if you want to go to Rockfin and Rumble, do so. You can go to Rumble, my name. You can go to Rockfin, my name. Just search that. I'll also even put the Rumble link in the video, in the chat right now on YouTube, so you can get on Rumble. And because you need to follow me there. The point of this is you need to follow me there if I am nixed from here. With that said, the best place to support me, go to the video description and support me on Patreon. That's the best place. Patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. That's how you sustain and support this independent media. That's how you make this work happen. You make this channel happen. Of course, there are other places to support as well. You can support on Substack. You can support on YouTube. You can become a YouTube member. You can, of course, also do one-time options like Buy Me a Coffee or PayPal. And of course, super chats and all that are very much appreciated on the YouTube side. So with that said, let me do some shout outs to the super chats. New Beginnings, who's also a member. Thank you so much for that super chat and being a member. Sam K said, "You dare to speak to me, peasant? I'm a senator. LOL, Aaron. Next time you go on the Comedy Cellar podcast, please bring Mike Palid with you to shut Noma." All right, that was directed to Aaron. Thank you. That's exactly how Chris Coons treated Aaron Maté. How dare you speak to me? I'm a senator. When he said that. So Aaron is pure class X, says 007 Angelo, thrown off, then apologize for getting thrown off. Now that's class. Plus we need a meme of Silent Bob throwing Aaron off. Yeah, Yes, he is. He is. He's Aaron is as professional as it gets in independent journalism. So, Sam K says arming fanatics in Syria like Biden did in Syria during the Obama years. Yes, that did happen. Thanks so much, Sam. Firmware says, when have you ever heard the phrase the Palestinian state has a right to exist? Never, really. Never. Even when they claim to be for the two-state solution. Not even the United States would ever utter the words Palestinian state, which China actually does and Russia actually does quite frequently. Then you have summer of 1970. Thank you so much for that. Thank you for that super chat. And then we have a new member. Welcome, Kevin O'Neill. Thank you so much for becoming a member of this channel. With all that said, everybody, lastly on this note, I appreciate everything. I appreciate all the support. And for those who decide to subscribe as a paid member, you get early notifications, early access to certain kinds of work. YouTube membership does make it a little hard, though. I'll warn you. If you want to move over to Patreon or even Substack, you get a little bit more interaction. But if anything, on all platforms, you do get the ability to ask questions and suggest content and guests. That is really the big thing that I try to offer. Alternatively, you also, of course, get early notifications to everything. And on platforms that allow it, with YouTube, really needs to clean up things. I do offer also, some other things too. But really, no, my content is not so much exclusive. It is mainly public. It is a matter. The communities, though, are great. And so what I offer is more collaboration, because I know all of you have great things to say, great thoughts and ideas. And of course, no independent media can be done alone. Given the volume of work that I do, of course, all of your contributions are so valuable, because, it does help keep this work going and promote the voices, the content that people want to hear. And of course, one person. This is a one-man operation, mainly with some help from wonderful volunteers at the DD Geopolitics. But with that said, it is the creation, how this all works is a one-man operation. So of course, your support and your thoughts are always welcome. So with that said, everybody, we are out of here. All right, we are done today. It was a great stream. I appreciate all of you coming through. I appreciate all of you for your support in all the ways that you can. And I'll be back with all of you very soon. Once again, thanks, of course, to the wonderful guest, Lowkey, someone I've looked up to for many years. And it's so wonderful to have him on my program for the third time, I believe. Yes, third time. And of course, Aaron Maté and his journalism, his independent journalism, investigative journalism, that that is a rarity these days. So of course, thanks to the wonderful guests, thanks to the wonderful viewers, wonderful supporters. I will see you all again very soon, and take care. Bye-bye.